The night was colder than usual, and the neon sign outside the highway diner flickered with a faint buzz. It was the kind of place that always seemed half asleep, serving coffee to truckers and lonely travelers passing through town. Emily Carter, just 23 years old, tied her apron behind her waist and forced a smile. She had worked the night shift for almost a year now, and she had gotten used to the eerie quiet of those long hours. But there was something about this night that made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way the lights hummed above the counter, or maybe it was the fact that the owner, Mr. Doyle, was hanging around longer than usual in his office at the back. Emily was supposed to clock out at 2 a.m. But when the other waitress, Marissa, came in to take over the early morning shift, Emily wasn't there. At first, Marissa thought she had left early. But Emily's car was still parked outside, keys gone, purse missing. The coffee pot was still warm. The door to the diner was unlocked. And Emily's apron, the one she had just tied, was nowhere to be found. By sunrise, her family knew something was wrong. Emily was responsible, always called her mother when she finished late shifts. The police were called, and soon the diner parking lot was taped off. Officers walked in and out, searching for any trace of the young waitress. The investigation started with the obvious. They asked Mr. Doyle, the diner's owner, when he last saw her. He shrugged, saying he went home before midnight, had no idea what happened after that. He claimed to be as shocked as anyone else. But when detectives spoke with Marissa, she mentioned something odd. She had noticed the office light was still on when she arrived for her shift, but when she peeked in, the room was dark. Doyle insisted he hadn't been there. Police didn't stop there. They interviewed other employees who worked at the diner. One cook said he remembered Doyle being unusually strict with Emily in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Another waitress admitted that Doyle had made Emily uncomfortable more than once, saying things that crossed the line. But none of them had any solid proof, nothing that could be tied to her vanishing. The police expanded their search. They combed through nearby woods, checked surveillance from gas stations along the highway, and questioned regular customers. One trucker recalled seeing Emily serving coffee around midnight. Another claimed he noticed a strange man sitting in a booth near the back, someone he had never seen before, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. But no one could say what happened after those final hours. Emily's family pleaded with the public for answers. Flyers went up around town, her smile staring back from telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards. Weeks passed. The case grew colder. Tips slowed down. Without a body, without evidence, there was only speculation. Some believed Emily had run away, that maybe she wanted to start over somewhere new. Others whispered that she had been taken by a passing stranger. But her mother refused to believe either. Emily wouldn't have left without a word. And she never would have abandoned her younger brother, who adored her. As the months dragged on, suspicion circled back to Doyle. Police questioned him again, and again he denied any involvement. His alibis were shaky, but there wasn't enough to make an arrest. The diner continued to run, though business never recovered. Customers avoided it, spooked by the rumors. Employees quit one by one, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible had happened inside those walls. Years later, the diner closed for good. Dust gathered on the counters, and the neon sign went dark. But the story of Emily Carter never left the town. Some swore they could still see her reflection in the diner window at night, as if she was still waiting to be found. And then, nearly a decade later, something finally stirred the case back to life. The diner was sold to new owners, who planned to renovate it into a family restaurant. Workers arrived with sledgehammers and crowbars, tearing apart the old structure piece by piece. It was just another job, until one of them broke through a wall behind the office. His crowbar clanged against something hollow. When they peeled back the plaster, they froze. Because inside, in that narrow crawl space, they found something no one expected. Before I tell you what they uncovered, take a moment. If you're still here with me, it means this mystery has pulled you in just like it did me. Do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your theory so far, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, the discovery inside that wall changed everything. When the first worker shined his flashlight into that hollow space behind the office wall, his stomach dropped. There, wedged between beams, was a tattered waitress uniform. Its once bright teal fabric was dulled with dust and stains. Clumps of dark brown hair clung to the plaster, as though they had been sealed in for years. And scratched faintly into the wooden studs were words. Desperate, shaky words. The message read, "Help me, please." The renovation crew stopped immediately. Police were called, and soon the lot was swarming with detectives. Crime scene tape wrapped once again around the same diner where Emily Carter had vanished nearly 10 years earlier. For the first time in years, the investigation roared back to life. Tests confirmed what everyone already feared. The hair belonged to Emily. But there was more. On the uniform, trapped within the folds, investigators found traces of blood and fragments of old rope. It wasn't enough to paint the full picture, but it was undeniable proof that she hadn't run away. She hadn't left town. She had been there inside the diner all along. Naturally, all eyes turned once again to Mr. Doyle, the former owner. The man who had spent decades presenting himself as a harmless small-town businessman now looked more suspicious than ever. Detectives tracked him down. He had moved 2 towns over, living in a modest home, retired and trying to fade into obscurity. They brought him in for questioning, but Doyle stuck to the same story. He knew nothing. Claimed the building was old, full of strange crawl spaces no one ever used. Said if something had been hidden in the walls, it wasn't his doing. But detectives weren't buying it this time. They reopened files, re-interviewed every former employee they could find. One by one, the stories began to paint a darker picture. A former cook recalled how Doyle would often ask Emily to stay late, even after her shifts were over. He claimed Emily once confided that she felt watched whenever Doyle was around. Another waitress, who had left years earlier, admitted Doyle had cornered her in the office once, though she escaped before anything happened. And Marissa, the one who discovered Emily missing that night, revealed she always suspected Doyle, but fear had kept her quiet. Detectives noted that none of these stories were new crimes they could charge him with. But together they wove a chilling portrait of a man who abused his power, who created an environment of fear. And then came the handwriting. Forensic experts compared the writing on the wall with samples of Emily's notes from high school, old letters her mother kept. The match was unmistakable. Those shaky words inside the wall had been written by Emily herself. She had been alive, trapped, desperate enough to scratch out her final plea for help. The question was, how did she get there? And who put her there? As evidence mounted, detectives turned up the pressure on Doyle. They asked again and again, why was the uniform inside his office wall? How could hair and blood be found there without his knowledge? Doyle grew agitated. At one point, he demanded a lawyer and stormed out of questioning. But it wasn't just Doyle under scrutiny anymore. Investigators revisited every employee who had worked the diner during those years. Some were reluctant to talk. Others seemed almost relieved, as though the weight of silence had finally lifted. One former dishwasher admitted he once saw Doyle arguing heatedly with Emily the week she vanished. He claimed Doyle grabbed her wrist, though she pulled away quickly. Another remembered seeing Doyle carrying a large box out the back door late that same night. None of these accounts were concrete evidence. But together, they formed a haunting puzzle that seemed to point in only one direction. And yet, the case still lacked the one thing detectives needed most: body. Because without finding Emily herself, they couldn't prove exactly what happened. They couldn't even officially declare her dead. But just when it seemed the investigation might stall again, a new lead emerged. And it came from the most unlikely source. Before I tell you what that lead was, take a second. If you're invested in Emily's story, don't just watch silently. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. Do you think Doyle is guilty? Or could there be someone else we're overlooking? Because the next twist in this case will make you rethink everything. Nearly a decade had passed since Emily Carter's disappearance, and for years her case had gathered dust, sealed away in the cold case files of a small-town police department that had run out of options. But now, with the shocking discovery of her uniform and hair behind the diner's office wall, the community was on edge. Whispers of foul play filled coffee shops and grocery store aisles, neighbors exchanging stories late into the night. Some swore they had always suspected the diner's owner, Richard Doyle. Others wondered aloud if perhaps someone else, maybe even another employee, had played a role. Just when detectives feared the case might stall again, the unexpected happened. A man in his late 30s who had moved out of state years earlier was scrolling through news on his phone when a headline caught his eye. Waitress missing since 2015, uniform found inside diner wall. His stomach dropped. Suddenly, a memory he had buried deep came rushing back, a memory he had never thought was important until that very moment. The man had once worked as a delivery driver, making late-night produce drops at Doyle's diner. He remembered one particular night vividly, not because of anything dramatic that happened, but because of how unsettling Doyle had seemed. He recalled Doyle standing in the dim glow of a flickering backlight, sweating profusely even though it was early spring and cool outside. Doyle's shirt was clinging to him, his hands shaky as he signed for the delivery. The driver had tried to push his cart of crates into the back storage room, but Doyle had blocked the doorway with a stiff arm, insisting the crates be left by the door. His voice was sharp, almost desperate. At the time, the driver chalked it up to Doyle being in a bad mood. But now, after seeing Emily's story in the news, another detail he remembered made his blood run cold. Doyle's fingernails that night had been caked with dirt, thick, dark clumps wedged under every nail. The driver had thought maybe Doyle had been fixing something outside, maybe dealing with a broken pipe or digging up trash around the dumpster. But now, he couldn't shake the thought that Doyle had been digging for a far more sinister reason. The man hesitated before making the call, but finally dialed the tip line listed in the article. Within days, detectives flew him back into town to hear his story firsthand. He repeated the details over and over, his voice trembling as he admitted how guilty he felt for not coming forward sooner. For investigators, the testimony was the missing spark. They had hair samples, a uniform, writing on a wall, but nothing that explained where Emily's body was. This driver's story suggested something Doyle may have buried, something that still lay hidden under the soil of that cursed diner property. A week later, the lot was cordoned off once again. This time, police weren't searching walls. They brought in a specialized team equipped with ground-penetrating radar. The machine swept across the property like a silent detective, sending signals deep into the earth. For hours nothing appeared. Detectives grew restless, pacing, their hopes dimming. And then, just behind the diner near the old dumpster area, the radar screen lit up with irregularities, unusual voids beneath the surface, the kind that only come from human disturbance. Excavation began immediately. A small crowd gathered, drawn by curiosity and horror. Neighbors clutched their jackets against the wind, murmuring nervously. A few former employees of the diner stood off to the side, pale and wide-eyed, reliving old fears. The sound of shovels cutting into dirt filled the air, each scoop carrying the possibility of a grim discovery. After nearly 2 hours of digging, one of the workers' shovels struck something solid. The hollow thunk was unmistakable. Slowly, carefully, the team cleared away more dirt until the outline of a wooden box emerged. Old, rotting, its lid swollen from years underground. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as officers pried the lid open. Inside there was no body. But what they did find sent a shiver through everyone present. Wrapped carefully in a stained cloth were Emily's belongings. A pair of scuffed sneakers, size 6, matching the exact size she wore when she vanished. A delicate silver locket with the initials EC, carved on the back, a gift her mother had confirmed she wore constantly. And most haunting of all, a small journal. Its pages were water-damaged, smudged, but fragments of Emily's handwriting were still visible. Notes about long shifts, about dreams she had for the future, about the exhaustion of balancing work and community college classes. The last few entries stopped abruptly days before she disappeared. The items were bagged, tagged, and rushed to the lab. For Emily's family, the discovery was both devastating and validating. Devastating because it confirmed beyond doubt that Emily had not left of her own free will. Validating because it proved what they had insisted all along, that something terrible had happened inside that diner, and Doyle had been at the center of it. When detectives confronted Doyle with the discovery, his reaction was bizarre. At first he scoffed, calling it a cruel joke. He claimed he had no idea how the box ended up buried on property he once owned. When pressed, he grew defensive, his face red, his voice raised. Finally he leaned back, crossed his arms, and demanded a lawyer. It was a familiar routine. Deny, deflect, and retreat behind legal protection. But to the detectives, his behavior spoke volumes. If he were truly innocent, why did every new piece of evidence make him lash out? Yet despite their suspicions, the case still wasn't airtight. In the eyes of the law, Doyle remained a free man. Without a body, prosecutors worried the defense could argue that Emily had staged her own disappearance. Even with the belongings, even with the uniform, the evidence was still circumstantial. So investigators dug deeper. They began re-interviewing every employee who had ever worked under Doyle. This time they weren't asking politely. They pressed harder, warning that withholding information could result in obstruction charges. Slowly, the cracks in the silence began to show. One former waitress, now in her 30s, broke down in tears as she admitted Doyle had approached her the week Emily vanished. He offered her extra cash to stay loyal, and not repeat things she might have overheard. She took the money at the time, young and scared, but confessed it had eaten away at her ever since. Another former dishwasher remembered hearing muffled cries coming from Doyle's office on the night Emily disappeared. He told himself back then it was the wind or maybe the radio left on, but the sound never really left his mind. Now, with the revelations of the wall and the buried box, he knew what those cries had likely been. These testimonies added weight to the suspicion, and they aligned with what forensic handwriting experts had already confirmed. The desperate message scrawled inside the wall belonged to Emily. Her final plea for help had been carved into the very structure of the place she had once worked, the place Doyle controlled. The town was consumed by the case. Local papers printed every new development in bold headlines. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Some argued Doyle's guilt was obvious, while others insisted there had to be more to the story. How could one man hide such horrors for so long? Did someone help him? Or had employees stayed silent out of fear? Meanwhile, detectives continued to watch Doyle. His routines, his calls, his movements. They noted how he avoided certain questions, how his temper flared whenever Emily's name was mentioned. And then, just as they began to think they might have reached another standstill, a fresh lead emerged. Not from the diner, but from Doyle's own backyard. Before we reveal what investigators discovered there, I want to pause and ask you, if you were on the jury right now, sitting in a courtroom with these facts, Emily's uniform hidden in the wall, her hair samples, her belongings buried on Doyle's property, and multiple employees testifying against him, would it be enough for you to convict? Or would you demand more? Comment below with your thoughts, and if you want to see where this case goes, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Because the next development in Doyle's backyard would shake this story to its core. Detectives secured a warrant to search Doyle's property. His backyard was modest, with a rusting shed and a patch of uneven soil near the fence line. It didn't look like much, until the cadaver dogs were brought in. Within minutes, the dogs alerted to the same spot. The ground was dug carefully, inch by inch, until the unmistakable outline of human remains began to surface. Bones, fragments of fabric, and jewelry long buried beneath the dirt. Forensic tests later confirmed what everyone already suspected. After nearly a decade of unanswered questions, Emily Carter had finally been found. Her family, broken but relieved, wept at the news. There was no longer any denying what had happened. Emily hadn't run away. She hadn't disappeared into thin air. She had been murdered, hidden, and silenced by the very man who had once employed her. The trial that followed was one of the most watched in the region's history. Former employees testified. Forensic experts walked the jury through every detail: the handwriting in the wall, the uniform, the box of belongings, and finally, the remains in Doyle's yard. Piece by piece, the prosecution built an unshakable narrative. Doyle's defense crumbled. His denials sounded hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Doyle was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But even as justice was served, the town never fully healed. The diner was demolished. Emily's story became a reminder that even the most ordinary places can hide the darkest secrets. Today, her family says they find peace only in remembering who Emily was, not how she died. A young woman full of promise, cut short by someone she trusted. And that's why cases like hers matter. Because every time a story like this is told, it ensures that victims are never forgotten. Before I close, let me ask you this. Do you think there were others who knew about Doyle's secret? Did employees suspect more than they admitted? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you've made it this far into the story, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video. It's the best way to support stories that keep victims' memories alive. Emily's case proves one thing: the truth may be buried, but it cannot stay hidden forever.